Welcome to MyCounselor.Online. I'm Cassie, and today I get to chat with one of our awesome therapists about an article she recently wrote talking about how you can be helpful to an addicted spouse. It is so challenging when somebody in our life is facing an addiction, and often the things that we are trying to do to be helpful, to show them love, to show them support, can actually work against their progress and recovery. So I can't wait to chat with Alison and find out what she says that's going to help us help the people in our life. Alison, thanks for meeting with me today to chat about your article.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me, Cassie. It's always good to see you.
You too. And I am loving this opportunity to chat with all the counselors about the articles they're reading. And I found your article, 5 Ways to Support an Addicted Spouse, really fascinating, really helpful, some things that I hadn't thought about or considered before. So I'm anxious to jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so before we start talking about, I'm just going to pick a few points out of your article for us to talk about. But before we start talking about ways that we can support them, I'm curious, what kind of things do you see in the counseling office that people that have an addicted spouse or someone that they love are doing that are actually, they're trying to be helpful, they're trying to show love. So yeah. It's actually working against that person's recovery journey.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of the times spouses in that situation want so badly to help, and really what they're doing is they're covering up some of the negative things that the addicted spouses are doing, or like the negative consequences for potentially some of the bad behaviors that they're engaging in. The spouse wants good things for them, wants them to be okay, wants them to live a normal life, right? And so they have a tendency to cover those things up, sweep those things under the rug, kind of clean up after their spouse. And so I think it makes it so that the addicted spouse doesn't really see the negative consequences of their behavior. So even though the spouse feels like they're helping, what they're doing is they're not really letting their spouse see how their behavior is affecting them and the world around them and their community. So I think that's the biggest thing.
That seems really big. Like that would affect many, many areas of life. And I imagine that would grow a bitterness in that spouse over time. So that's really good to think about and ponder on about not just addicted relationships, you know, somebody with an addiction, but in general, the relationships in our life and how we're engaging them. So, okay, so I just picked 3 of your 5 points just for us to discuss during this interview. And the first one that you say, 5 ways to support an addicted spouse, is seek outside support for yourself. So that was really interesting. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about what kind of outside support you mean and why. Why is that important?
Oh, definitely. I think it's so important because a lot of times in our culture, and especially in Christian cultures, we don't often talk about addiction, and there can be a lot of shame around that for people, both the people who are addicted, and if you're in love with someone who's addicted, like it's almost like you're ashamed of that piece of them, and you're ashamed or feel like people might judge you if you are still in love with that person and still want to be in relationship with that person and try to make the marriage work, right? And so it can feel really, really isolating. And there's really, like, I can't think of a single situation where being isolated is a good thing.
Yes.
We are built to be in community with other people, and we need their support no matter what. And if our spouse is going through something really difficult, we can't get everything we need from them because they're going through their own battle, they're going through their own struggle. And so we have to kind of feel like the strong one in those situations. So not only is our one person that we're connected to the most not really in a position to be there for us, we have a tendency to shy away from the people who could be. So that's why that was like a big thing. I think it's really important. And there are so many resources out there for people who are going through this. There's like al-anon groups and a bunch of different variations of that, groups specific to loved ones who are loved ones of addicts.
Yeah.
And there's like Christian support groups out there like Celebrate Recovery and several other ones that are along those same lines. Or even just finding people in your life and in your circle that you can be vulnerable with and that you can have those open and honest discussions with, and those people that you don't have to be the strong one with. I think it's really important to have that.
That's so good. And it fascinates me, and I can't get away from every interview that I do. It all comes back to community. It comes back to our relationships with other people and us supporting one another, and that being an integral part of the journey. So.
Definitely. It's key. It's so important. Like, we were made to be in community. God made it that way for a reason, because we need each other, right? Even in our good moments and our bad moments.
Yes, especially in our bad moments sometimes.
Exactly.
The second thing that I want to talk about is you mentioned prayer, and that gets so cliche. So I want you to dive into that for a minute and talk about, why does it matter to pray for your spouse?
Oh, definitely. I think, oh my gosh, like prayer, God like is in charge, right? Like, he's the creator of the universe and he loves us more than anybody else will ever love us, right? And so I think prayer does so many things, not only for us, but for our spouse, right? We can pray for them because we ultimately don't have control over what they do. We don't have control over the choices they make, right? So we could be hurting for them, but feel kind of really hopeless in that space. And so I think prayer gives us something to do where we don't feel as hopeless, right? And I think it also helps change our hearts so that we can see the situation the way that God sees it. Right?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
Yeah.
We're in those really tough times and we just feel, human things. We need the reminder of how God sees our spouse and how, he's going to help us to have empathy, but also have good boundaries with them, which is the next thing that I want to talk about from your article. Boundaries, set boundaries, you say. So what are boundaries? How do we know when we need to set them? What could that look like?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think boundaries, I like to describe it, and there's lots of different ways to think about it, but it's kind of, boundaries is me teaching you how to treat me, right? Me teaching you how to show me respect, right? Because that's not always obvious, and boundaries look different to different people, right? But it's learning the difference between you and me, and then teaching you how to treat me within that, and you teaching me how to treat you, right? And I think a lot of times we feel like those get blurred when we get like uncomfortable, or somebody asks us to do something, we're like, I don't know how I feel about that, right? It's that uneasiness that comes when those boundaries are getting crossed. So being able to say, like, you know what, I'm actually not comfortable being a part of that. Or actually, could you not bring that into our house? I don't want that.
That discomfort in ourselves tips us off. Yeah. Oh, I have an emotional or a reason for feeling a certain way, and my emotions that I feel upset about that are tipping me off to, I need to make a boundary about that, or I need to communicate and express my expectation for how you're going to treat me around that issue.
I think especially around things like addiction, there can be a lot of blurred lines.
Yeah.
And a lot of ambiguity, and a lot of like, just it all can feel like a gray area in some circumstances. And so really trying to rely on like trusting your gut in a lot of those situations and saying, okay, I'm actually not comfortable with this. And even though I love you and I want good things for you, I have to say no, or whatever that looks like.
I think that's so freeing, honestly. I mean, it's not easy to put that boundary in place, but to know that there's a reason that we feel the way we do, and you're validating the reason. You're validating the people that are listening that have that uncomfortableness, and they're thinking, well, if I loved them, I would just let them do that, or I would be okay with it because that's what they need or want or whatever. But God gives us an intuition and a feeling around those things for a purpose, and that's good. That we should move forward with that.
Exactly. And I think even you brought it up earlier too, it helps prevent that resentment and that bitterness growing too. If we're able to kind of acknowledge that when we have that feeling, or kind of learn over time, like, okay, yeah, I'm not comfortable with this. It also helps prevent that bitterness and that resentment that can grow if we're always trying to acquiesce or bend to what our spouse wants, even if we're not comfortable with it.
Which is so important, because bitterness and resentment is the opposite of what we're trying to do with our spouse. So that's really helpful, and I appreciate you writing this article, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, Alison.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Cassie. It's a pleasure.
That was an awesome interview. I highly encourage you to check out the rest of Alison's article and the other resources by our awesome therapists. We have a slew of them, and you can find them at MyCounselor.Online.